This particular exhibition was about Bauhaus in Kolkata way back in 1922. That was also one December. Another December in 100 years after. In 2022, we are sitting here remembering that particular show which took place a century ago. This exhibition started on 23rd of December. On 24th, we had a seminar, followed by one open forum on 38th. And today we are here at something new which usually doesn't happen in case of exhibitions. We are having a valedictory session today. And we are so fortunate that we have Professor Vishwa Bharati as our valedictory speaker. So I request Professor Bharati to kindly take his seat. As we all know, is a professor of art history and yoga philosophy at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He has also authored a book on Oriental Art, and he just stepped in. That was a very interesting day when I came to the gallery and found Professor Bharati sitting over here. Before that, we were not in connection, but he got to know about this particular exhibition in one of the street posters, and by asking his friends, he reached here, and we were so happy that he was happy to see this show. Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking out your time. আমি অভিজিৎ দাকে অনুরোধ করব, চারুকালুর কর্ণধার অভিজিৎ দা আমাদের আজকের অতিথি অধ্যাপক দেবাশিস ব্যানার্জিকে বরণ করে দিতেন। এই মাইকটাকে একটু ঠিক করো, এখানে কে আছে মাইকে? মুখের সামনে So, without further delay, I request Professor Bharati to kindly start his presentation. Thank you. Once the presentation is over, then the floor will be open for question answer session. Initially, for his own convenience, Professor Bharati will be speaking in simple English, followed by Bengali interpretation also. But for the viewers, you can ask both in English or Bengali as per your convenience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sanjay Sengupta, and all friends of Sahayaan for inviting me to give this talk today. I believe this is the last day of the exhibition. So I stumbled upon this exhibition, and I really didn't know what to expect, because I saw a poster of this exhibition outside Presidency University, and I found out by chance, by asking around, that there was this kind of an exhibition, and I came up here because a friend of mine from the United States, you can see him actually there on the screen, Dr. Devin Zuber, was visiting, and we both share an interest in this confluence of the Bauhaus and Shantiniketan, Kolkata, etc. We've just worked on this together, and so I found it very interesting. We met over here and we went through the exhibition. We discovered that it's really what one might call a research exhibition, an exhibition of putting forward not original works, but the concept and what's behind it. So the very idea of this kind of an exhibition in a small, intimate space in Kolkata, not in a public, large scale, but among people who might stumble upon it just like I did, was a very interesting kind of event. And it represents a formation, a creation of collective memory on an intimate level, which is a very different thing than public memory, which tends to become a stereotype, become a national event or a event for the people at large. So this kind of an event is the featuring of collective memory at the level of people who find it something that they can internalize in their own lives, so that it's a looking back. And so, just as Sanjay had put out on the poster, to take, but what to take, right? That is the question. So this taking, what is preceded is this looking back. So I titled the talk, Looking Back and Taking Forward. And this is what this event is all about. This is what this talk is about. This is what this exhibition is about. This is what this phenomenon is about. Looking back to take forward. So history is really something which lives with us. It's all around us, it's inside us. We forget it and we think that we've arrived at a certain moment in time which is reality. But reality or actuality is always spectral. There are the ghosts of history that live with us, live among us. And this kind of looking back allows these alternative actualities, I wouldn't even say alternative histories, alternative actualities to live among us again and become relevant for our times. And that's, to take, but what to take. One takes not something which is dead, but something which is alive and which lives with us and releases those forces so that another kind of future may be born. I think that is the real, power of this kind of an event in the lives of a few people, because that's what it is. It's about making your own in a personal way, in an individual way. So that's why I named this Looking Back and Taking Forward, Bauhaus in Kolkata Centenary 1922 to 2022. So we go back to 1922, and all of you have already seen the narrative of this history, this exhibition, which tells you what happened in 1922. There were about 250 paintings of Bauhaus artists that came to Kolkata, and about an equivalent number of artworks by Bengal school artists were exhibited along with them. Plus, there were also traditional craftspeople and sculptors associated with the Bengal school. this is not a fact that you'll see in the list of artists. It's also something that we have to keep in mind, because there is a kind of, struggle there. You see, in the sense that, as you see, the Bengal School, the Bauhaus, and another movement closely connected to both of these, which is the arts and crafts movement in England, were largely invested in breaking the hierarchy between fine arts and crafts. Art or painting or sculpture or whatever we call the fine arts is an act of craftsmanship. And the craftsperson is as much an artist as any other artist. And so this was also the aim of the Bengal school. And in that sense, there were traditional craftspeople from Odisha, from Tamil Nadu, that were represented, that were part of the Bengal school. But you won't see their names there. You come to know about it only when you read the review by O.C. Ganguly, who talks about some of these people. So these were all displayed together. And this is an event that seemed to have been forgotten by history. In fact, even in the reminiscences of some of the principal people involved in this event, we don't hear much about this event. Abanindranath's very picturesque memories of his life carry nothing about this event. There is no mention of this event. So this event seems to have come and gone in public memory, largely forgotten. But suddenly it has come, you see this event here. In 2013, there was an exhibition of this particular event in Dessau, in the Bauhaus, second generation. When this exhibition took place, Bauhaus was in Weimar. So this was the Weimar Republic just after the First World War, and that's where Bauhaus was centered. But in the very next year, that is in 1923, there was a big shift and Bauhaus moved to Dessau. And the big Bauhaus building, if you look for the Bauhaus building, it's more associated with Walter Gropius's construction architecture in Dessau. So what we find is that in 2013 there was an exhibition to celebrate this very event at Dessau. And the picture that you see there is of that exhibition. It's interesting because you might be mistaken to think that is a picture of this exhibition right here. It shows you how, I don't know if you all thought about it in those terms, that there is a certain repetition of history right there, of space and of image. So this event in 2013 itself was because, again, there was a return of this seemingly forgotten event in the book Art and Nationalism, Art and Colonialism, Art and Nationalism in Colonial India, which is Partha Mittar's book on that period and on the people over there, where he hailed this event as the beginning of modernism in India. Okay. Now, this of course, this particular slant on this event was questioned from the very beginning, because it was a very anonymous, almost unknown event. But why was he giving it this importance, calling it the birth of modernism in India in 1922? Nevertheless, as it happens, with the way in which dead things come back to life, that book spawned a new interest in this event. And so in 2013, he was one of the people involved in this Bauhaus exhibition in Dessau, remembering this event. And some of the objects over here are from that exhibition. Now, prior to this, so this is again a certain kind of a historical contestation, their historiography, different histories of the same event or the same phenomenon of modernism in India. So prior to this, it was supposed, or what was the marker for modernism in India? It was the progressive artists group in Bombay. And again, in a similar way, just as we were being told that modernism, by Partha Mithra, that modernism was catalyzed by the Bauhaus artists coming to India, this was a similar catalyzation of the Bombay artists by the German emigres after the Nazi, emigration. People like German Jews such as Langhammer, Schlesinger, and Rudi von Leyden, who were very important in creating a culture of modernism in Bombay in the 1940s. So we are talking about 20 years later and after the Second World War. While we are talking here about before the Second World War, between the First and Second World Wars. But the dark period of world history that lies between throws its shadow both ahead and behind. And it has something to do with both these events. But there was a kind of a revision, it seemed, of this idea of modernism. Also to be noted is this obsession with the idea of the foreigner coming and seeding something new, And I think even in the 2013 exhibition, there was a challenging of that idea. Partha Mithra challenges that idea generally in his work by saying that modernism is not necessarily something that's imported from the West, but has multiple centers across the world where there are various forces at work to respond to modernity. And this is one of the responses to modernity. And I think that's how we should see this event, even if it seems to be forgotten in history and now coming back. Now, to look back, we should first look back a little further in history, and that is to 1919, because the immediate precedent of 1922 is 1919. 1919, two institutions were founded that were in some sense very similar and responded in very similar ways to the forces of history at that time. One was the founding of Bauhaus. The Bauhaus was just founded in 1919, 1922. This was the first exhibition of the Bauhaus artists outside of Germany, 1922. So it's significant that their first exhibition was in Kolkata, of all places. So Bauhaus was founded in 1919 in Weimar, which was the seat of the German Republic after the First World War, with Walter Gropius as its director. You can see Walter Gropius over there. Very intense looking person, charismatic, extremely charismatic, and another very charismatic person who occupies an iconic position in Bengal to this day. Rabindranath Tagore founded Vishwa Bharati in 1919 at Shantiniketan, close to Kolkata, as a kind of a educational experiment in higher education. So the founding of the Bauhaus in Weimar, what was the Bauhaus? The Bauhaus was an architecture and design school, but this notion, which actually lives even to this day among ideologically inflected architects, that somehow they are here to change the world. This is the birth of that particular idea. So Gropius was looking at the Bauhaus much more than as just a design school or a school of architecture, but he saw architecture almost like a symbol for the construction of a new Germany. Okay, in the shambles of the First World War, what kind of a new nation are we going to build? What is the Germany we're going to build? So Bauhaus, the term was coined by him. It literally means house construction, and he saw architecture as a basis and a metaphor for national construction. He brought in talented artists, architects, designers, and theatre personalities from different parts of Europe to form this residential, experimental, creative community. This is very important to realize. What he was looking for is not an institution that is going to just teach during the day and people study at night or something like that. It was a 24-hour habitus, experimental, creative habitus. And that was what he was trying to build, a community. So, as I mentioned already, there is another past and another association to both Shantiniketan and Bauhaus, and that is William Morris's arts and crafts movement in Great Britain, which aimed at the aesthetic renewal of everyday life. So this is a response to the mechanization and the utilitarianization of common life in Britain. How can we beautify our everyday life? So this is also part of what is moving into the Bauhaus. How can we make our mundane, mass-produced existence into something which is creative at its center? So that was the idea. Like arts and crafts, he didn't believe in the divisions or hierarchies between art and craft. And this is again something that we've noted, that in the medieval period, an art school actually taught all the arts. And the people in that school learned all the arts, some learning something a little more than other arts, but working together as a guild, a system of apprenticeship. And this is also something that the Bauhaus artists looked for in other parts of the world. And this is where we come to the association with India. The arts and crafts people did that as well. They were also looking to medieval India as a space where the arts were taught in a kind of a holistic manner. All people learned everything, and then they took roles to build these temples or other kinds of constructions. And so that kind of a idea that had different origins in the world was adulated both by arts and crafts people and also by Bauhaus people. So the architecture was at the center. All the visual arts were featured, such as design, painting, sculpture, and theater. The person whose image you see over there, that mural, which is in Weimar even today, is Oskar Schlemmer. Oskar Schlemmer was part of Bauhaus at the time when the exhibition happened, but none of his pieces came. He already came in, I think, in 1919 itself. A very creative person, designer, and also a theater personality. We'll see some of his other works as well. So this mix of people that Gropius brought together, which is what often happens. I may say that always happens in history, is that there are many forces that affiliate, that come together, and that seem to have a common response to the present, to the times. But as time proceeds, those forces start developing in different ways, and sometimes they pull against each other. And there is a certain kind of a explosion that may take place. The same, set of people and forces may break up and go in different directions. And that's the story of Bauhaus as well. So we find that different kinds of modernist forces were represented in Bauhaus at that time. Particularly, I think the two major forces that were at play was a machine aesthetic and nature spirituality. So machine aesthetic, we are familiar with Bauhaus today in terms of the machine aesthetic. That how can we take the mass-produced product and beautify it, make it elegant, make it beautiful in a way which is purely formal. You see, this is the thing, that let's shear it of all symbolism, let's shear it of all history, of all culture, let's accept the fact that modernity is about the escape from history, is about the creation of a perpetual progress, but let's make that into the basis of our sense of beauty, just pure formal beauty. So that was there, but also along with it were these other forces which engaged with the past, this looking back, that in a way we are not just engaged with the technological present, but we are also bringing into it the pagan histories of spirituality that should live again. The materials that are not enduring, like wood, for example, or a symbolism of various kinds, and things like that. And Gropius himself was invested in those kinds of ideas. He thought about the Gothic period in Europe as a model from which the Bauhaus would take its birth, but he also saw India as a kind of, sort of almost synonymous with the Gothic period. So India as a spiritual culture and Indian art and architecture as exemplifying the aesthetic and working ideals to be followed. As I said, the nature of production, artistic production, which was decentered, had various arts in it, people working together as a community, those type of ideas were extremely prized by Gropius when he was looking for examples to model his institute. Now, the chief person that we are interested in as far as this exhibition is concerned, however, is not Walter Gropius. It's Johannes City. And the reason there's a variety of reasons for that. The main reason is, of course, that Stella Kramrisch knew Johannes City, and they had common friends. But also, Rabindranath and Johannes City had a mixed relationship. Itten came to Berlin to meet Rabindranath in 1921 when he had gone there, but he did not meet him. But you can see that there is this interest, there is almost a kind of attempt to connect, which happens later due to this event. So it's an anticipation that comes into fruition, so to say. So he was the main contact for the Kolkata exhibition. Who was Johannes City? He was a Swiss expressionist painter, designer, writer, and theorist. Brought in by Walter Gropius, but became extremely important in Bauhaus, partly because of his own charismatic, you can see, he's a very more charismatic than Gropius perhaps, and the fact that he had very fixed ideas that he started propagating throughout the school. Very quickly, he took over their canteen and he dictated the diet that everybody had to have. He dictated the kind of things that they would do. All he was supposed to do is teach the foundation course. But this is what comes from the loose blurring of boundaries between life and work, you see. So this is something interesting, that he started shaping the life of the institution. He invited two very important artists who are also featured in this exhibition. That's Paul Klee and George Musch into Bauhaus. And he followed an eclectic kind of spirituality, which was again very characteristic of the times in Europe, characteristic of the times now as well, which is a new brand of spirituality called Masdasnan. I found out that Masdasnan is not dead, it's still around. There is a small Masdasnan group in Los Angeles, California, that still draws its roots from what Iten was a part of. And it was an eclectic mysticism, but its center was Zoroastrianism, or their understanding or interpretation of Zoroastrianism, which included meditation, vegetarianism, breathing and physical exercise, yoga, just yoga asanas, just as they are practiced today, and things of that nature. All these kind of influences he made his students follow, and eventually he tried to impose it on the entire Bauhaus. Now he wrote the book Utopia, and you all have seen, I think, that the cover of Utopia is featured over here, and he sent a number of copies of that book over here. It's in German. I don't know how many people got it and who could read it, but it has lots of beautiful designs. This is one of the pages inside the book. It included design calligraphy, but it also included quotations from various spiritual and mystical sources, including the Rig Veda and Buddhist texts. And it had the photograph of an Indian temple from Gujarat, a medieval temple, very rich, extremely crowded with its sculpture, and really an example of that kind of very fine collective work that the Bauhaus wanted to promote. Complex artistic workmanship. He was in the Bauhaus from 1919 to 1922, and as I mentioned, his sort of pushing of his agenda started making water Gropius uncomfortable, and it developed into a kind of a conflict. Over time, he came into increasing conflict with Gropius due to the domination of Bauhaus life with his cultic ideas, leading to his resignation in 1922. So this exhibition, and would not even have happened, was it slightly later. This is his swan song, so to say. He leaves Bauhaus, and Bauhaus also moves from Weimar to Dessau just after this. Moving to the Indian side, the person responsible from behind for a good part of this exhibition from the Indian side is Rabindranath Tagore, and he founded Vishwa Bharati in 1919 at Shantiniketan under colonized conditions, and we have to see this founding also as a response to colonization and to modernity. What is the alternative form of education that can be developed that goes back, again looking back to other sources of human making? And I think that was the center, at the center of Rabindranath's enterprise, this human making, which is what he called Vishwamano, universal human making. So this universal human making, so this is, I think, where he differed from a lot of the people of that time who were extremely invested in nationalism. What he was interested in is that people should bring the roots of their cultural life into engagement with the world forces, and that they ought to synthesize and develop universal personalities. This is what he wanted to do in Shantiniketan. So you may say, just like he built or promoted the building of cultural enclaves like China Bhavan or Japan Bhavan, etc., Bauhaus in his mind was sort of like that. It was outside, but a sister organization of a communal, communitarian life that featured another kind of culture that could enrich Indian culture and vice versa in the making of the universal human. As you know, the motto of Vishwa Bharati, Yatra Vishwam Bhavati Eka Nidam, where the word becomes one nest. This same idea, he talks about this notion of the imaginary journeys of the mind, where people from certain cultures need to come into contact with other cultures, which is also an effect of modernity. Modernity allows that to happen. And in happening, what we encounter is otherness. And that otherness opens us to the blind spots in our own culture. All cultures have their own set of ideas that they develop over time, over history. But all ideas are selections, and they block out other ideas. If we cling to them, we become ideological and ethnocentric. But if we are open to the questions that were never asked in our society, in our culture, then these are the voyages of the mind that help us to become universal, that help us to develop features of universal humanity. He also started an art school inside Vishwa Bharati, which is Kala Bhavan, in 1919, originally with Aship Haldar as the person in charge. And then in 1921, he invited Nandalal Bose, both of them students of Abanindranath, connected with the Indian Society of Oriental Art, that was the organ through which this exhibition came to Kolkata. So, in 1921, Rabindranath traveled to Germany for the first time. And this picture actually shows you one of the talks he's giving in Germany in 1921 at a university there. Rabindranath by this time had already received the Nobel Prize. And this receiving of the Nobel Prize was also something that was related to circles that were well known to the Bauhaus and circles that are of the arts and crafts movement. The India Society, for example, people like William Rothenstein. So all these people form a kind of an invisible web of friendship, affiliation that created a certain image of Rabindranath by the time he came to Germany. So he was received already as a kind of sage from India, right? A kind of a spiritual leader from India. And you can see that Rabindranath also fashioned himself along those lines, but not in a kind of stereotypical way. You can see Rabindranath's self-fashioning as an example of the eclecticism of a kind of a pan-Asian spiritual figure. See, that it's difficult to pinpoint where is he from. See? So he traveled to Germany in 1921, had large audiences in Berlin. He did not go to Weimar, and this is the missed connection. Itten came to meet him, but missed him. He had left Berlin when Itten came for an event which featured some of his works. He's the one, so Stella Kramrisch was invited by Rabindranath in the same year, 1919, but she joined Shantiniketan in the same year, 1922, earlier that same year, and part of their discussion led to this idea that the bringing of art from Europe would allow the possibility of these voyages of the mind for Indian artists or Indian creative personalities to conduct. So this is the other important figure behind this exhibition. It's Stella Kramrisch, an Indian art historian from Vienna. She knew Itten through her teacher Strygowski, who was close to the Bauhaus circles. He was also close to the arts and crafts circles. She joined Vishwa Bharati in 1922 and was associated with the Indian Society of Oriental Art in Kolkata and co-editor of its journal from 1933. But she was associated with it from the very beginning, and so she, so there's a possibility that this exhibition could have happened in Shantiniketan. But I think they well saw that the urban exposure would be much greater if it happened in Kolkata. And so that's the reason why she did it through the auspices of the Indian Society of Oriental Art, sending the letter that I think you can see over here. She wrote she wrote introductions to a few of the artists, to Kandinsky, Itten, Feininger, and Klee, over here. So the Indian Society of Oriental Art was founded by the nephews of Rabindranath, that is the brothers Govindranath and Abanindranath Thakur, in 1907. The Indian Society of Oriental Art was an institute largely to promote the ideas and paintings of the Bengal School of Art, led by Abanindranath, and it was patronized by both Indian lovers of art as well as British Indophiles. So that's the organization through which this invitation is being sent, and which becomes the host of the exhibition. Again, that has its own background. So this background again connects through the arts and crafts movement to this larger set of forces. The Bengal School's inception came from the confluence of Abanindranath Thakur and E.B. Havel at the Calcutta Government School of Arts and Crafts, where Abanindranath was appointed vice principal in 1905. Havel himself was part of the circle of South Kensington School of Crafts in London, associated with the arts and crafts movement. He started the India Society in his home in 1910 after returning from India in 1906. The India Society included Indophiles and Indologists such as Ananda Kumaraswamy and William Rothenstein, and was very influential across Europe. So this is one of the organizations through which these networks are spreading that caused this event to happen. Now, the Indian Society of Oriental Art was, of course, based in Kolkata. Classes were taught before going to Shantiniketan by people like Ashit Haldar and Nandalal Bose, but also by other first-generation artists of the Bengal School, like Hitindranath Mujumdar and other major Bengal School artists. Now, as we've already noted, by 1922, Ashit Haldar and Nandalal Bose had moved to Shantiniketan, and there were their students, and particularly Nandalal's students, a few of them were also exhibited in this exhibition, which makes it a kind of a larger spread, so to say. Indian artists included both Kolkata and Shantiniketan artists. Some of the Shantiniketan artists are people like Vinod Bihari Mukherjee and V. Masoji. And what you see there is something of the kind of work that he was doing before his later work. It's more allied to the decorative work of Nandalal, for example. Now, another channel through which these ideas are coming in are the brothers Abanindranath and Govindranath themselves. Abanindranath's connections in the India Society and in Paris made art books, journals, and magazines of modernism available to the brothers. And Govindranath is the one who is making best use of all this material that's coming in. From these, Gaganendranath assimilated German expressionist cartoons from 1917 to 1921 and began working in a Cubist mode from 1921. He was among the only Indian artists whose paintings bore any stylistic resemblance to the Bauhaus styles. He may have been familiar, this is something that Ratan Parimu has surmised, that he may have been familiar with Feininger's caricature work and his later atmospheric cubism. So the kind of cubism that Gaganendranath was practicing, particularly this is actually a later work, but at this time in 1922, he was in the process of transiting to his cubist style. And the kind of work he was doing is very atmospheric. It's very related. I mean, Parimu has talked about it, others have also talked about it, that it was related to the play of lights as having a certain three-dimensionality and creating intersecting planes and a kind of a invisible world of architectonics of invisible space, so to say. And so that kind of work has some resemblance to the kind of cubism that Feininger was doing. Though Feininger develops that also over time. Now, looking back, so this is, the whole notion of what does it mean to look back? Looking back, it's not just that we are looking back. These people were themselves looking back. So the whole enterprise is one of modernity and looking back to retrieve something against the grain of this accelerated thrust into the future that we have little agency in counteracting in our times. So both Bauhaus and the Bengal School were responses to modernity in a way. And the exhibition was written up sort of in that way. The Bauhaus was a response to the post-Renaissance academic naturalism. In other words, this already has a history from post-impressionism, where the European artists are trying to counteract the Renaissance naturalism. And then also the whole notion of post-Enlightenment utilitarianism. So these are the two major ideas that they are counteracting by turning to subjectivism, abstraction, craftsmanship, and material properties. Look to the materials themselves. They wanted to give value to visual properties of materials. So these are the various ways in which they are interacting with modernity. They look back to the medieval period, so Gothic architecture, the guilds of craftsmen who work together in all the arts. So that's partly the experimental communitarian space that is a creative collective. Gropius followed this model by designating his teachers as meisters, which is really a medieval model of the teachers of the school guilds, apprenticeship guilds, following the medieval guilds. Similarly, he looked back to pre-modern Asia and places like India and Japan. Now, similarly, if we come to the Bengal school, we find that it's a response to colonial domination in the form of academic naturalism. So again, we find in the very beginnings with the association with Havel and the notion of turning away from academic naturalism to look at canons of art making that were more traditional. So alternative Asian styles and canons of painting drawn from Indian miniatures and due to the influence of Okakura and his artists, Japanese techniques and styles. Again, in terms of looking back, they're looking back to Mughal and Bahari painting, to Indian native mythological and natural subjects, and they're bringing into their circles traditional crafts of Tamil Nadu and Odisha. Again, as I mentioned, in this very exhibition, there were objects made by those craftsmen their names don't feature in those lists or catalogs, but they were also equally a part of the exhibition. Many criticized the Bengal school as a revivalist school. So this also has to do with the notion of looking back. What kind of looking back are we talking about? Is it a revival? So many people thought or talked about it as a revival. And I'd say, again, just like in Bauhaus, there was a complex collection of forces, some of which were revivalist in all the artists, and some of which were more revolutionary and forward-looking. Through Indologists such as Havel, Kumaraswamy, and Sister Nivedita, Indologists like Havel, Kumaraswamy, and Sister Nivedita often thought that they were not Indian enough. So this complaint or criticism against the Bengal school was occasionally and repeatedly made, that they were not following exactly the canons of what was being, through art history, presented as Indian art. Now, taking forward, so this is the thing about looking back and taking forward. Was there any aftermath? So this is the thing, did this exhibition have any influence, anything that remained after it left? And it would seem that it had very little influence, but I would say that it did have subtle influences in some of the artists. Well, firstly, in 1923, the very next year, there was a major exhibition of Bengal school art in Berlin. The German artists were not very much influenced by it. They visited it mainly for thematic interest. Most of the Indian artists were not significantly influenced by the Bauhaus paintings, but I would say that some were. And Shiv Kumar has talked about contextual modernism with respect to Shantiniketan. I'd say the legacy of Bauhaus was a kind of a contextual assimilation of modernism by a few of the artists. Govindranath continued to evolve his Cubist style from 1921 to 25 and his post-Cubist paintings from 1925 to 30 with greater creative imagination. Now, some of his paintings at this time show a different kind of treatment, which is not necessarily the sort of atmospheric cubism that he was practicing with those intersecting planes, etc. This is one of them. It's called City Street. I would say this looks much more like one of Kandinsky's works than what his other works are. See, it's much more flattened. You don't get that sense of intersecting planes. And there is, if it is a city street, there is more a sense of the forces behind that are pulsating in the city, rather than that kind of three-dimensionality that we get a sense of in his Cubist paintings. Avanindranath also started moving towards more experimental styles after this, particularly with forms in his mask series and his later works which displayed expressionistic qualities. So this is one of his masks. His mask series has not been sufficiently discussed. It's a very important series, I think, that needs attention. This is his mask of Govindranath. And you also see these more expressionistic and more dark, foreboding, kind of distorted figures that seem to appear in his paintings after this period. This painting called Keeper of Umbrellas, it's a little later, from 1930s. I think there was a big period where he didn't paint. It's only from the mid-30s that he returns to doing some paintings. Rabindranath, of course, I would say he must have at least gained new confidence after this exhibition. He began painting his expressionistic portraits and landscapes in profusion from 1930. This is a 1930 painting. Similarly, Vinod Bihari also we start seeing change in his art after this period. He increasingly adopted a style that assimilated elements of post-impressionism and expressionism. This is a 1930 painting by Vinod Bihari, Man with Lantern. Now, so looking back and taking forward. So when we talk about taking forward, this is the notion of taking forward for the artists, but what can we take forward from this? And to answer that question, I'd first say we need to consider what not to take forward. What were the dangers and dark features of this, the forces surrounding this exhibition? Soon after the exhibition, Bauhaus underwent radical changes which represent directions of ideological orthodoxy. Firstly, they were in the eye of the Nazis that ultimately made them close down. But also there was internal cultism. And this is the thing that I was mentioning about Itten. Itten's spirituality became increasingly cultish and prescriptive. He began dominating Bauhaus with his diet, exercises, and behaviors to be followed by everyone, bringing him increasingly into conflict with Gropius and finally making him resign in 1923. This is an image of, you can see Itten there with his bag, teaching his exercises to the Bauhaus people. Another thing to think about, what not to take. Soon after the exhibition, Bauhaus underwent, we've already talked about this, one of the changes was this turn towards the machine aesthetic, which is what we know Bauhaus for now. The complexity got reduced, I'd say. So perhaps as a result of the extreme positions of Itten, Gropius, who moved with the Bauhaus to Dessau in 1923, increasingly espoused a machine aesthetic, leading to a break with the historical and cultural traditions that he was more comfortable with before that. This led to the modernist aesthetic for which Bauhaus is known today. Critiquing this move, the American writer Tom Wolfe wrote a book titled From Bauhaus to Our House. In other words, this so-called revolution completely, erased the past and created a new world in which we were bereft of any history, so to say. So this yields the reaction of postmodernism in architecture. Many Bauhaus masters moved to the US after its closure by the Nazi regime, changing the American urban skyline. Postmodernism in architecture arose as a reaction to the Bauhaus functional aesthetic from the late 1960s, partly as a result of popular rejection of this aesthetic. People did not feel comfortable in Bauhaus houses. And I'd say that is also true for places like India, because the aftermath or the following of Bauhaus by people like Le Corbusier, who was brought into Chandigarh, created this new modernist aesthetic here, but people were uncomfortable with it. They didn't find a kind of a comfortable dwelling place there. One may see this even in India, where Corbusier's Chandigarh has remained alien to the native population of the city. Postmodernism in architecture recognizes the human need for playful forms, symbols, and cultural references in architecture. So this is, again, we have to think about this in taking forward. And the image shows you Charles Correa, who's a major proponent of this kind of postmodernism, contextual postmodernism. Another thing not to take is traditional stereotypes. the story of Orpheus and Eurydice exemplifies what happens when we look back with an effort to see our expected past. The past becomes fossilized and dies, an object of museology, tourism, cliched nostalgia, or worst of all, ethnocentrism. See? So this is partly the story of the Bengal school, where we find that a number of Bengal school artists sought to repeat the themes, forms, and styles of the past or of their teachers, ending in stagnation and irrelevance. If you look at the list of the artworks at this exhibition, you'll be surprised to see the number of similarities. The same themes, everybody's painting the same themes. Sometime one painting done by Abanindranath or by Nangalal, and then you find others are painting the same thing over and over again. What to take? Firstly, the need to archive forms of memory for the future. That's also one of the kind of gaps of this very attempt to look back. See, and we talked about the 2013 exhibition in Dessau, which Tapati is here right now, was one of the important, I'd say, architects of that exhibition. How much is not known? How much has disappeared in history? Oh, okay. Okay, but whatever. I think that exhibition was an attempt to bring back a lot of what happened, but itself it revealed lots of holes. And again, over here we find so much is still not known. And to look back with some accuracy, we need to utilize technological archival methods, which I think is an important thing to think about in taking forward. What was at the center of this that I'd say is to be taken forward is the idea of the subjective freedom to interpret and express reality. This was what Bauhaus was about. This, I'd say, was what the Bengal school started off as, but in a way they got stuck in a certain lexicon. They could not break that lexicon, so the subjective freedom was creative, and within a certain bound, they couldn't go beyond that. So looking back to engage with the present and create alternative futures. Both these, streams are doing that. They are looking back to respond to modernity and create alternative futures. A contextual modernism, revolutionizing the utilitarianism and neo-colonialism of modernity by bringing creativity into everyday life. This is, I think, behind both these efforts. How do we respond to the flattening of our times? I talked about Rabindranath's idea of the voyages of the mind, intercultural voyages of the mind. That's something else, intercultural, intersubjective creative exchange. That our subjective lives have to be open to assimilating the other at all times. We grow in our universality by coming into contact with and assimilating the other. And I think one of the most important things to think about and take forward is the idea of experimental communities engaging subjective differences to build shared creative cultures. So the more one becomes subjectively individualistic, the more one separates oneself from others. But at the same time, how can we find languages of creative community? I think this is a very important idea behind Bauhaus, as well as I think what Rabindranath wanted and what Rabindranath himself was trying to do towards the end of his life. How can one build playful, creative communities? So you see this an example of this kind of sort of very imaginative life of Bauhaus. This is again Oscar Schlemmer, who we saw towards the beginning, and the kind of costumes he made and the types of lives that were led by the Bauhaus people around these imaginary objects. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bharati, for this wonderful discussion. So now it's open to question answer. If you, anyone from the audience wants to ask it. যদি আপনারা কিছু জিজ্ঞেস করতে চান বা কিছু বলতে চান, anyone? I think
জিজ্ঞেস করার চেয়ে বেশি বলতে চান যদি কেউ। নিশ্চয়ই নিশ্চয়ই।
আলোচনা বাংলা ইংরেজি You understand very well? No. No. Okay. You can ask me the question. Now, just 2 points. Thank you for a wonderful lecture, really. And just to say that the only way I was involved with the Bauhaus was when Vishwa Bharati and Catherine Blomberg came and did interviews with me and Shiv Moy. And I thought about, in fact, that's one of the points when we are talking about what the afterlife of the exhibition is. I had a sense that it's more what Kitchen's idea and then Gropius's idea of breaking down the distinction between art, design and craft, working with the guild idea, the idea of creating artistic communities, that Rabindranath really carries away to Shanti. But I made the argument in the talk I gave at the exhibition that maybe the Calcutta exhibition mattered more to Bauhaus than it mattered to Calcutta artists at that stage. Because if you're looking for stylistic exchange, there's none. We're looking for some resonance we find, of course, Rabindranath, Rabindranath. Vinod Bihari and Ram Shankar had not yet joined Kolkata. It's unlikely that they saw the exhibition. My sense is, and they moved to Dessau in 26. 23 is when Bauhaus had its own big exhibition, for which the catalogue is there. Laszlo Mohali, G. Rice, okay. Is that Calcutta is the first time that Bauhaus has an international outreach, and Calcutta exhibition precedes their own first group exhibition in Dessau. So, which is why well before the Bauhaus 2022 centenary in Kolkata, it is in Dessau that there was a great interest and in Weimar to recreate or to return to this moment. And when Sanjay and all were doing this exhibition, we reflected on why is it that people talk about Bauhaus, but much later. It is when art historians return to think about what are the foundational moments of modernism in Indian art history, that Patramitta and Ratan Parimal, they drew attention to the fact that Bauhaus artworks had traveled. But it's a history which is erased from the archive and the memory of the city, which is why even a copy of the catalogue was not available anywhere. It was something that Patramitta found in Lahore. The space where is the Indian Society of Oriental Art, where is Shomobai Mansion? They did some research and found that it's a Putnani building. So in a way, the Society of Oriental Art remains important. But this event, which is later given so much importance in modern Indian art history, remains a strangely obscure memory. And obscure not just in the public, but even for scholars who want to do research. there is very few traces it remains.
Yeah.
So it was with my books that they reconstructed.
Right.
So here is, so this is a point I feel we need to sit and think about. That's one. Second, you talk about stylistic novelties. If we're looking for stylistic novelty, sure, then the Bengal school remains stereotypical. But the other point I wanted to reflect on is that when I first saw the catalogue, it was entirely a representation not just of the high Bengal school, but the lesser Bengal school people. It was disappointing because you felt the two modernities were not talking to each other. But I now also realize that what constitutes the modern and national in Bengal or in India, because when they didn't bring artwork from anywhere else in India, they represented the national and the modern. So I think it's worth reflecting that in 1922, these artists were holding for the flag bearers of what national modern meant.
Yeah.
And I think we need to return to that to understand the continuous importance of Oriental Art school through the 20s. His students are going out to head institutions all over the country. Hindikanath Majumdar, Kamarendra Gupta, Manivishan Gupta. In a way, it becomes the alternative national institutionalized history. Continuation, yes, but that. So just because we talk about looking back as a way of becoming fossilized, that's been a way in which we thought of it, that the modern take away. But I think one needs to think about the Bengal school as becoming the new institutional face of the national modern in the day. Just these 2 points I want to put there. And where is the government painting of the city streets?
I'm not sure. I don't know
I've
where
never
it is.
seen it before.
Yeah.
So where did you find it?
Yeah, I found it.
It's not in the Rabindra Bharati Society.
No, it's not in the Rabindra Bharati Society collection. I'll look for it. I archived it from somewhere, and I'm not sure where.
Astonishing.
Yeah, it is it not? Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Tapati. I think those are very pertinent points, both of them. And particularly, I think what you said about the fact that it might have had more of an impact on the German painters who really were receptive to new vocabularies of art and trying to develop into a kind of a more eclectic, creative culture.
I also felt that the memory is more important to
that
the history of Bauhaus than the history of Calcutta. So that in a way is the first large exhibition of Bauhaus work within 3 years of its founding in 1990. So it is a very important moment in Bauhaus' history.
Yes.
More than in Calcutta.
I must say this is also a kind of interesting understanding for the practitioners of this land as Bengali art practitioners, because usually we have a kind of common perception that everything comes from the West. So it's not like that. The world is round and things go in different directions. The West also looks at us, we also look at them. So, Shomati যদি কিছু বলেন, আর কারো কিছু যদি প্রশ্ন থাকে।
একটা প্রশ্ন বারবার মনে হচ্ছে যে আর্টের ক্ষেত্রে মানে ফাইন আর্টের ক্ষেত্রে হয়তো ইনফ্লুয়েন্স মানে একটা বিরাট ইনফ্লুয়েন্স পড়েনি, মানে সেই সময় যেহেতু জাতীয়তাবাদী আন্দোলন একটা খুব কেন্দ্রীভূত ছিল, কিন্তু আমার যেটা মনে হয় যে পরবর্তী 50 বছর 60 বছর ধরে আর্কিটেকচার মানে কনস্ট্রাকশন ক্ষেত্রে কি পড়েনি, মানে মানে আমার তো মনে হয় যে আমি খুব একটা স্পেসিফিক নাম বলতে পারবো না, কিন্তু অলরাউন্ড মানে এই সময়টাতে অনেকটাই মনে হয় আর্কিটেকচারাল লেভেলে ইনফ্লুয়েন্স করেছিল। ইনফ্যাক্ট শান্তিনিকেতনের স্টুডেন্ট যখন এই সমস্ত বাড়িগুলো ডিজাইন করছেন তার মধ্যেও কিন্তু কিছুটা প্রভাব পড়েছে। আপনি যদি বলেন মানে সেটার যদি কোনো
হ্যাঁ, এই দিকটা তো আমি দেখিও নি খুব একটা, কিন্তু ডেফিনেটলি কারণ এটা আর্কিটেকচার স্কুল ছিল, আর ডিজাইন ওয়াজ অ্যান ইম্পর্টেন্ট অ্যাসপেক্ট of people like Surendranath Kaur, etc. Several artists were interested in design and construction. So, হ্যাঁ, সেটা নিশ্চয়ই সেটা দেখার মতন, এই দিকটা খুব একটা ভালো করে দেখা।
নতুনভাবে সমস্ত আর্কিটেকচারগুলো তৈরি করছে, নিউ দিল্লি যখন ফাউন্ড করছে, ওল্ড দিল্লি থেকে নিউ দিল্লিতে ওদের চাকরি জায়গা, তখন আমাদের এই বেঙ্গল স্কুলের আর্টিস্টদের নিয়ে যাওয়া হয়েছিল। ওয়ান অফ দেম সমরেন্দ্রনাথ গুপ্ত, এরকম আরো কয়েকজন। এবং এই সময়ই প্যাট্রিক গেজেস, উনিও এই টাউন প্ল্যানার হিসেবে এখানে ওয়েস্ট বেঙ্গলে কাজ করছিলেন। তখন উনি দুজনকে, মুকুল দে অ্যান্ড সারদার উকিল, এই দুজনকে আবার সমরেন্দ্রনাথ দিলেন যে তোমরা এই গেজেস যেখানে যেখানে বলবে সেখানকার, যেমন আমাদের যেরকম আছে গ্রামের যে বাড়িঘরগুলো আছে এইগুলোকে রিক্রিয়েট করার জন্য, এবং যে পুরনো ধরনের বাড়িগুলোকেও রিক্রিয়েট করার জন্য এরা গেছিলেন এবং সমস্ত কাজটা এরা করেছে। তখন থেকে এই আর্টিস্টদেরই কিন্তু এনজয় করা হয়েছে আগে থেকে। আর এর আগে যে ডিউরিং দ্য ফার্স্ট ওয়ার্ল্ড ওয়ার গভর্নমেন্ট জার্মানি আর ইংল্যান্ড তারা খুব খারাপভাবে কাটাচ্ছিল, ইভেন ইন আমেরিকা, তারা তাদের একটা ঘরবাড়িগুলো খুব খারাপ ছিল। তখন এরাও কিন্তু সেটা ভাবতে শুরু করেছে যে সাধারণ মানুষের ঘরবাড়িগুলো কি করে ভালো করা যায়। তাই এটা কিন্তু আগে থেকেই চিন্তা শুরু হয়েছে। আর 1920s এ 22s এ অবশ্যই এই কাজটা চলছে। একটা কথা বলি, দেবাশিস এই কথাটা কি বললেন দেখতে পাচ্ছি, অসিত কুমার হালদার গত দিনগুলো অফ কলা ভবন appointed by Rabindranath. And after that, Nandalal Bose joined the Kala Bhavan during 1918. It was not Kala Bhavan at that time, 1918, and he come to and go back, come during the weekend. After that, এটা বাড়াতে লাগবে। এমনি করে অসিত কুমার চলে গেলে নিঃশ্বাস পাঠাতে কিন্তু অসিত কুমার প্রথম এবং নন্দলাল সেকেন্ড, এটা এখানে উল্লেখ করলে ভালো। একটা রবীন্দ্রনাথের একটা সার্টিফিকেট আছে, ব্রিটিশ সাথে বেরিয়েছে থেকে পড়াচ্ছেন।
আর পেছনে যারা বসে আছেন যদি কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকে, আশিস দা কিছু বলবেন? এদিকে আচ্ছা, নবদা যারা বললেন তার উপরে আমি একটা কথা একটু বলতে চাইবো, সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমরা তো এই 1922 প্রদর্শনীটা নিয়ে কথা বলছি, তো এই প্রদর্শনীটার প্রভাব আর্কিটেকচারে খুব বেশি পড়েছিল বলে মনে হয় না। এটা হতে পারে যে বাউহাউস এজ এ মুভমেন্ট সেটা পরবর্তীকালে অন্য কোনো পথ ধরে হয়তো এখানকার স্থাপত্য বিদ্যার উপর প্রভাব বিস্তার করেছিল। বিশেষ করে 60-এর দশকে যে ওখানে এনআইডি তৈরি হচ্ছে, এনআইডি ওয়াজ ভেরি ইনস্ট্রুমেন্টাল।
আরেকটা জানার ইচ্ছে ছিল যে আপনি বলবেন না যে এক্সিবিশনে এই ক্যাটালগে আমরা শুধু পেইন্টিংস গুলোর নাম পাচ্ছি, কিন্তু সেই সময় অন্যান্য ক্রাফট অবজেক্টস, আর্ট অবজেক্টস were also on display. তখন গিরধারীলাল মহাপাত্র, এটা আমরা কোথা থেকে ইন্ডিকেশন পাচ্ছি কারণ সেই এক্সিবিশনে তো ক্যাটালগ ছাড়া আমরা আর কোনো ফটোগ্রাফস কিছু পাচ্ছি না।
ফটোগ্রাফস পাওয়া যাচ্ছে না, কিন্তু ওই
পত্রিকাগুলি কোথায় কিন্তু উনি ক্রাফট অবজেক্টসের কথা
বলেছেন, এটাতেই আছে, এখানে হ্যাঁ লেখাতে আছে,
অন্য ইন্ডিয়ান আর্ট অবজেক্টস were on display।
হ্যাঁ
ওই একই স্পেসে
he actually praises I think Giridharilal Mohapatro's sculpture. Yeah, he praises his sculpture in that সেটা থেকে আমি জানতাম but I think ওটাই ওদের
আমরা কোনো ফটোগ্রাফ পাচ্ছি না।
So,
thank you so much for the wonderful talk. I had a question regarding in terms of film as a medium and also the attempts by say Frank Austin and Himanshu Rai, and if that could be seen as an extension, even though this again is happening in the 1920s, but as like parallel to this in terms of how the sets would be designed and how also thematically how it would be imagined, and also because Frank Austin viewing it and the collaborations essentially again are very international in that sense. So how would you see it in this light?
Oh, that's also a very interesting thing, that how it travels into the other arts and particularly into theatre we can see, but into film, for example, I don't know, the photography became important in the Bauhaus, but I think a little later. At this point, I don't see that same importance given. But you could say that part of its afterlife is its movement into film and things like that.
well, I think we don't have any other questions. Pamalda, what's up? Please.
I just wanted to know whether is there anything remains right now in Bauhaus internationally, all over the German aesthetic sense or any international aesthetic sense? Is there remains of Bauhaus movement till now?
You mean of the movement? Yes.
Movement.
I'd say it's everywhere. There are even mass-produced. Say IKEA, for example, is a really popular brand. I don't know if IKEA has made its entry into India. Yeah, so it's the Bauhaus aesthetic, which is everywhere.
Other than architecture, is there anything
Design, in design.
other than architecture? Okay.
Yeah. Typography, yes.
There is a Bauhaus archive and museum, one in Berlin and one in Dessau.
Right.
So they have preserved the history of Bauhaus in Germany.
Yes.
It's not an erased memory.
Yes. Bauhaus is very alive.
Sorry for keeping everybody longer than expected. I was just thinking about the tension between universalism and nationalism that you alluded to when you were talking about Tagore's idea of Vishwa Bharati. And then we came to know as Bengal School of Art promoting their idea of nationalism. So how do you see these two coming into contact during this exhibition? Was there any tension, or is this exhibition firmly rooted into nationalism and a response to modernism?
I don't think it is firmly rooted in nationalism. I'd say it's more rooted in universalism in that sense. I'd say, as far as the Bengal school was concerned, at this point in time, they get co-opted as a kind of cultural politics of nationalism. But I think there is more of this sense of kind of an expansive identity. maybe there are layers. Some of the artists were more invested in nationalism, but I don't think it was this kind of an ethnocentric nationalism.
So with this, we come to the end of today's program, as well as this particular event, this exhibition, and I'm happy to inform you that we are also planning to put these materials into an online archive so that it remains available for everyone. And as Professor Banerjee already suggested us, advised us to, if we can come up with a publication on this. So if Sir guides us, then definitely we can. So with these lines, we come to the end of the event. আমি কমল থেকে বলবো একটু ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন করতে। কমল কৃষ্ণ।
নমস্কার, উপস্থিত সমবেত সকলকে ধন্যবাদ জানাই। 30 থেকে 7 তারিখ আমাদের এই প্রদর্শনী চলছিল, অনেকেই এসেছেন, দেখেছেন। অধ্যাপক ব্যানার্জি উনি তো নিজে থেকে এসেই আমাদের প্রচুর পরামর্শ দিয়েছেন। ভবিষ্যতে আপনাদের আমাদের সাথে পাবো এই আশা রাখি। আর সকলকে অনুরোধ, স্বাক্ষরের বই আছে, আপনারা যাওয়ার সময় আপনাদের নাম, ফোন নাম্বার বা ইমেল আইডিটা একটু লিখে, তাহলে আমরা ভবিষ্যতে যোগাযোগ করতে হবে। ধন্যবাদ।